Do you have the courage to stand behind your innate gifts, skills, and talents and share them with the world? That is what we're going to be exploring during this episode of Talking True. Today, my guest is Françoise E. Netter, and she is a body mind dynamics expert, and she has been leading retreats and workshops, and she's an author, and she's been doing amazing work for many years now. And we're going to be exploring the theme creative wisdom and resiliency, and looking at the things that may maybe stop us and block us from stepping into our authentic power and our authentic expression. So, Françoise, thank you for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you with me again. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's great being together again.
So, I think it might be fun to just share that something really kind of wild happened just about 20 minutes or so before I came on to this episode. I just happened to go on to my YouTube channel here to just, check and see how things were going with the latest episode that I'd uploaded this morning. And there was a really violent, there's no other way of putting it, but there was a violent, hate-filled message from a man. I don't know who the man was, but he had clearly taken the time to watch some, if not all, of the latest episode. And he was just on this wild rant and making very hate-filled comments. And the energy of it was really just so awful. But I had this incredible epiphany. Firstly, what I did was, rather than shrinking which is what I may have done in the past, I expanded and then directed light and love to this man. And then, of course, I took steps. I blocked him and, took the comments down and so on and so forth, because I'm not going to allow anything on the channel that has a really negative, dark energy and vibration. But the other part of that was, I said, wow, this clearly is evidence of why so many people are afraid to go on live shows or episodes on YouTube or wherever else. And they're also afraid to step out more widely in case they're criticized, condemned, or they receive a lot of hate. And I think that this kind of dark energy dynamic is really prevalent today. So anyway, it was a positive outcome for me because, like I said, I did not diminish. I went the other way and I expanded into the fullness and the light of who I am. And I sent love to this man because obviously, these kinds of things come out of self-hatred. They don't come from a place of love. So it'd be kind of maybe fun to start looking at that a little bit and maybe looking at the reasons that people close themselves down or they're afraid to step into their power and their light. And look at those things, Françoise. And I know you're an expert at, how to move through trauma and release, fear-based energy that can be locked into the body. So it'd be great to start with that, I think.
Yeah, and we talked about doing a series of wisdom, creative wisdom. And what I wanted to do, and you brought up a perfect analogy for how do we release trauma and activate joy. So what you talked about is when we don't feel good inside, either we hold it in and it just festers like a wound, or we throw it out. And I think what's happened with social media and with so many public forums that anybody can engage in is that it's a way for them to release their anger, but we don't know what else. And I think it's really important to look at, well, what is trauma and how is it different than just, ordinary, extraordinary challenges that we all have and a certain amount of suffering. So I wanted to sort of talk about that. So, because people don't talk about trauma, it's something we keep hidden. And as you can see, if we keep it hidden, then it comes out in very articulate ways that are completely misdirected. And I think it's really, again, significant because we're seeing in America, especially, more and more violence, coming with guns. I mean, because that's a very direct way to put out your anger. But how do we release these negative, toxic experiences that we may have ingested unknowingly, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how do we release them in a way that doesn't hurt ourselves and others?
Mm-hmm.
And it's coming now in ways that we've never experienced before with technology. Is it any safer than a gun? Well, yes and no, right? Because it
Mm-hmm.
may lead to an actual act of physical violence, not just emotional and mental. But we know that emotional and mental violence is just as damaging.
Yes, and we see evidence of that with respect to young people who are committing suicide because of online bullying. And of course, they're not old enough to be able to kind of, work around or, resolve that in a healthy way. And they can just take that energy on and feel less than, feel unworthy, believe what they're being told, and then take negative action as a consequence.
Exactly. So I wanted to, I used to teach a class and I still have it in my list on the website for educators, and it was called Bully Proofing Your Classroom. And one of the things that I always talked about is there's individual bullying and there's been a global bullying from the beginning of Western time or, patriarchal time. There's been global bullying. And what it usually means is that for every victim, there's a bully, and for every bully, there's a victim. And what does that mean? That means that they're flip sides of the same coin. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot be a bully and have self-esteem, and you cannot be a victim and have self-esteem. And what you showed is you were able to engage and no longer be the victim, no matter where it was coming from in that moment.
Yeah.
And that's because you've healed some
Mm-hmm.
inner wounds that gave you a belief that someone externally to you could tell you if you were good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
So let's dive in and let's talk about the difference between, things that just happen, in life and trauma.
Yes. Well,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
no, you asked me.
Now, I was going to say, I could share an actual event that occurred that was physical, a physically traumatic event, if that feels like the right time, or I could, wait until we've talked a little bit more, but I'd be happy to share that if that feels like the right time.
Well, go ahead and share that, and then I'll talk about the difference and how trauma really affects who we are, whether we're a little girl, a little boy, a baby, or we're an adult. But go
Okay.
ahead and share.
Okay. So this was in, I think, 1994, maybe something around that time. But I used to take a walk an early morning walk along the ocean front near where I lived, and I used to take like 30 minutes or something. And this particular morning, just as I was about to leave, I had this message that said, I heard this message within me that said, this might not be a good idea. And instead of heeding the warning, I just decided, I had a thought, well, I'm protected and Grace is with me and I'm going to be okay. And so I, took this walk, and then I was on the way back, and there was a car following me and there was no one else around, which was kind of unusual at that time in the morning. And this man stopped the car, got out of the car, and then he was yelling, can you tell me the directions to Winton Highway or wherever it was he was saying. And I just immediately got this this feeling of danger, that I needed to get out of there, because I could feel that I knew he was lying, number one. And number two, I knew that his intentions were not good. So I crossed over the road and I started to walk towards a house. I was close to this house and the kind of the fence. And I was going to go inside the gate and pretend like I lived there or I was meeting someone. But just before I managed to get there, this man drove his car. I didn't see him, but he was behind me. But he drove the car facing the wrong way on the road, and he used his car as a weapon to knock me down. And he hit me in my lower back, and I fell on all fours. And then he stopped the car and he came out, and I stood up and I was shaken and I really didn't know what was going on. And then he started coming towards me, grappling with me and saying, "Get into the car, get into the car." And I honestly, it's really hard to put into words what happened next, but I'll try my best, because the most incredibly powerful, very, very dark, fear-based energy began to move up my entire body, and I could feel it as this great force. And I recognized it, and I knew that I'd experienced this before. And I knew that if I gave into the fear and I went with this man, my life would be over. I knew it would have been the end. But then I saw that there was something behind this fear, and it was the energy of grace itself. And instead of focusing on the fear, I focused on the grace, and it moved up. It came into my heart. And then I started to repeat the mantra I'd been given from a great being. And the mantra is Om Namah Shivaya. Om is the primordial sound. Namah means I bow to. And Shiva, or Shivaya, is consciousness itself. So I was saying, I bow to the supreme consciousness within my own being. I said it out loud 3 times, and then I tried to bite his hand. I was wearing braces at the time, so I couldn't bite very hard. But he looked at me like, she's a crazy person. He let me go, and then he took off, and then he drove away. But what happened was I stood there in this kind of this radiance, and instead of moving into this role of the victim, I was just praying, thank you, God, this karma is over. And I forgive this man. And I was sending him love and light as he was driving away. And I continued to do that. I mean, I was in a lot of pain in the days that followed, and I had to go to court. There was a court case and all those things. But instead of playing the role of the victim, I played the role of the victor. And I stood in the power of that, and I proclaimed that. And I everywhere I went, I was praying and sending this man light and love and so on and so forth. And I was able to heal very quickly. It wasn't a huge, and actually a couple of weeks later, I did a month-long meditation course where I was sitting cross-legged and able to do the retreat. So anyway, that is my story of how really and truly I could have allowed that the trauma of that experience.
Absolutely.
I think it locks itself into the psyche and into the body, into the cells. And then from that point on, we kind of shape our lives in accordance with the fear around that, which is why fear around self-expression. So I'd love to hear your
so what you did, and thank you for sharing that, and for sharing that with everyone who's listening. For most people, when they encounter trauma, they have no preparation. So you obviously used your wisdom and the knowledge. When I was very involved in the same path that you are, using the same mantra, I almost got raped several times, but I was protected, and I knew I was. It was the most extraordinary thing. But again, I was in the knowledge of what you and I call Shakti, or the universal energy of protection. And when we're coming from that place, not that much can truly harm us. However, which, all of us really are seeking to find, right? In terms of this whole idea of releasing trauma and activating joy, you were able to do that in the moment, but not everybody has that awareness. That's why awareness is so important. So, what I'm talking about in trauma, and it could have been exactly, you could have been assaulted, you could have been left for dead, which many people are,
Mm-hmm.
and you use this incredible inner reliance on the alignment that you had been practicing and practicing. And for many people, so let's talk about the difference. So you transformed in the moment an experience that could have been outrageous trauma that would have changed your life for maybe years, maybe decades, maybe completely, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and instead turned it into a challenge and difficulty, which is different.
Yes.
So you transform trauma in the moment. Now, I want to tell you a story, which has always, and then I want to talk about what is the difference? Because everybody says, oh, what is trauma then? That wasn't trauma. What is trauma?
Mm-hmm.
And so I do remember one other story of this very great being. And he was modern. He was, he lectured at a bookstore. He had been arrested by the Nazis. His name was Jack Schwartz. He's no longer alive. And I think I met him in the 90s, 80s or 90s. And he was being tortured by the Nazis. And in the presence of being literally burned with a cigarette, he healed it. He healed his arm moment to moment as the cigarette was burning his skin. The skin began to heal right in that same moment. The Nazis were so freaked that they let him go. But
Wow.
who has that? And I have to say for you that that's extraordinary. So what is trauma? What's the difference? Trauma can be one event or it can be a series event. Let's say, I mean, I have worked with people as babies and children who were sexually assaulted and emotionally and physically. Um, and then there are people who live somewhere and uh, their child gets killed. And so trauma is an event or a series event that you completely feel out of control with. You're out of control. It's like it just spins you out. For many people, trauma will dissociate them physically from their bodies, from their minds, and from their hearts. What's so important then is whether it's directly after or decades later, is to release that, because along with the emotions and the mental experience, there is laid down what you were talking about, belief systems, beliefs. So let's say as a child, there's trauma. So there's a belief that they're not safe in their body, that they have no control, that obviously they caused this, so they may not be good, and on and on. And, you have adults in war who have post-traumatic stress, and we don't talk about it. Yes, they're in Veterans Hospital, but what we found is that it's those beliefs that are then laid as foundation that you begin to act from, just like you said, whether it was the guy that was after you physically or online.
Mm-hmm.
And um, there's some trauma in them. I mean, I just saw, I don't even believe I saw it, because usually I will not watch that, but I saw a special on Ted Bundy and how he just there was some part of him within that needed this distraction and this excitement. And that's the issue when you have trauma and then you react because you've shut down your feelings of vulnerability and victimhood and a sense of, how did I cause this? And I'm not good enough. And only bad things happen to me. That sometimes what arises is anger. And in that anger, you want to lash out, but that doesn't release it. It only creates more of the same toxicity.
Yes.
Whether it's against yourself. And in my research, I have found that for many women, they hurt themselves. So you find women who've been traumatized as children often have eating disorders, and they might do things like cutting, and um, and you certainly find both men and women who then use alcohol and drugs and other ways to numb their feelings,
Mm-hmm.
because it's the feeling associated with the trauma, whether it was sexual or assault or death or loss. It's like a shock that happens to the body, but
Yes.
it's the mind and the emotions then that store it physically. And then you invent, the mind is so creative. It like invents all these belief systems around it. I remember Abraham Hicks said, a belief is just a thought that
Mm-hmm.
you keep thinking. But see,
Yes.
in this world, we don't deal with the emotions. Now, it's really fascinating because when you look at war victims, whether, from recently the Holocaust, we haven't talked to the Ukrainians, we haven't talked to the Serbians, but we certainly now, there are not a lot of Holocaust survivors left. But there were so many that over this trauma, it wasn't a day, it was years and years and years of things being taken away from them, from the very basics of food and their children, everything they love, for those that survived. How did some survive with their emotions intact?
Yes.
With their spirit intact? And the research shows it was those that could somehow hold on to some creative sense of themselves in their spirit. And for many, it was trying to hold on to creativity. And in the camps, they were shot if they were found singing or dancing or doing art. So all of that had to happen in complete private and secrecy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So and how do we, once that trauma has set in, how do we release it? How do we let it go? And how do we, most importantly, transform it? And I think that's a word that I believe is key. We talk about it in metaphysics, alchemy. In the ancient days, do you remember that? The wizards with alchemy. And yet we know that in ancient times, a piece of coal, we talked about this last time, that the how a piece of coal is turned into a diamond, and even an oyster, right, is
Yeah.
through the grit. No, I have a sign up in my bathroom that said, no grit, no pearl.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
and
It's true.
and and yet, so let's go back to your experience as well. And yet we're not taught that the things that challenge us are opportunities for transformation. So in your situation, your intuition told you, this may not be a good idea, but you kind of said, no, it'll be all right.
Mm-hmm.
I've got grace. And you were able to maintain that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, all of us in our experiences, and this is really important too, is that what for one person could be just, yeah, whatever, that happened, is someone else's trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why it's so important for each one of us to reflect and see, am I on automatum? Am I just on autopilot all the time? What am I feeling? What am I breathing? Who am I? What triggers me? What unravels me? So I've just started teaching a meditation class, and one of the assignments I gave to everyone was, what unravels you? Just allow it to come into your consciousness. What unravels you? And then take that in and be aware of what are the feelings that come up when I feel unraveled by something outside. Because, see, we live in an outer world. And that's why the great yogis, as you know, always said, the real test is not sitting in a cave on top of a mountain and meditating.
Yes.
It's being out in the world.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
sometimes we fail miserably. I shared with Julie before we came on together that I got unraveled this week because my expectations were solely in that way. And then I allowed it to, when it was extremely disappointing, I allowed it to unravel me in terms of my belief system. I felt, oh, I'll never do this work. And, that was my only opportunity, and on and on. And it's those things that we say to ourselves. And when there are people like what occurred to you both online and physically, you've got to imagine what's going on internally, because they're not even aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
no one can, I really, truly believe that unless someone's an archetype of evil, and I believe there are people that are archetypes of, you don't want to be anything like them.
Mm-hmm.
and I also think that globally we go through transformation. It's been said that now those of us on the planet at this time, we're being called globally, culturally, to transform and change and take responsibility for our feelings. See, that's what you did.
Mm-hmm.
And you use very powerful tools in the moment.
Yes.
So let's ask the question, what would happen if we don't have those tools? What if we go through a series of trauma or a traumatic event that leaves us flat emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually? What do we do?
Yeah, it's tough, but before we go on to that, I'd love to just kind of speak to what happened following the event I shared, where this man was trying to abduct me. So, because I live on an island, I was living in Nassau here where I am now, and the island's only 7 miles by 21. So, of course, the news spread very quickly with respect to what had happened. So I started getting phone calls. And, I retell the story, and I would retell it without this kind of severe, intense emotion and the victimhood kind of emotion coming up. I would just tell the story. And there was a Scottish lady who called me, who at the time must have been in her late 70s, maybe early 80s. So I shared the story. Then we got off the phone. And 2 or 3 days later, she called me back and she said, Julie, I want you to know something. She said that a few hours after I told her what had happened to me, she had gone out. It was early evening, and she went out to her car because she was going to go drive somewhere. And she opened the car door, and there was a man sitting in her car, and he was trying to hotwire the car to steal it. So, and he had a knife that was sitting alongside him on the passenger, on the driver's seat. So she opened the door, and without flinching, she said, "What are you doing in my car? Please leave. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya." So apparently the man just looked at her like, again, she's crazy. And he just got up and ran and left. And I said to her, Molly, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad this worked for you. But, going forward, try and be a bit more mindful, and just make sure that you are okay. But anyway, so all of that happened. And the other thing happened is I actually felt like a ghost. I was walking around for several days afterwards like a ghost, because I absolutely had this 100% clear seeing that if I'd given into fear and gotten into the car, my life would have been over. So I really felt like a ghost, and I would have dreams where I'd look in the mirror and there'd be no reflection. And it was a very strange time. But through the work of healing and sending love and light to the perpetrator, I moved through that very, very, very quickly, and it didn't carry any weight in my psyche or in my sort of physicality from that point on. So, I think helping the work you're doing and sharing here and helping people find tools that can kind of equip them in a way that is organic for them, because obviously not everybody is a yogi and repeats mantras. Maybe your prayer is the Lord's Prayer, or whatever a prayer from the Jewish faith and tradition. But you have to kind of arm yourself, and you have to pre-practice. I think you have to be doing these things and doing these practices so that they almost become second nature to you in the event that you're faced with a really challenging, potentially traumatic situation.
Yeah, very true. And what you said too is that if you can ahead of time practice and get that what is it? Embodied and digested within you, then it can come out that way. But what do you do if this has happened as a child, or it's already happened and you weren't protected and you have not recovered, and you have beliefs that are stored emotionally and physically? How do you recover? What do you do? And I think the other thing that you said is really important as well, that not every technique works for everybody. But certainly there are tools. And let's talk about, first of all, the process of transformation, which leads to resiliency. And I want to define resiliency. To me, resiliency is not being able to just survive a trauma, but to be able to transform the beliefs, the emotions, the physical effects to such a degree that you do what you're talking about, which is to go from survival to thrival, and to be able through that thriving to do what you're doing, which is to pay it forward, to contribute. And I look at, the Dalai Lama, I look at Nelson Mandela, I look at Desmond Tutu, I look at the oldest living Holocaust survivor who had a documentary made after her. The lady in number 6, her name is Alice Hertz Summers, and she was an extraordinary being and was able to transform through her inner alignment and what you said, that embodiment. So to me, there are 4 stages to resiliency. Once you've gone through it and you didn't feel protected and you didn't know what to do and you could only dissociate or become a perpetrator yourself. And I think this is really important, because if we look at even the perpetrators as bad out there, then we're always playing victim and bully, right? Always. So what you did is you not only transformed the trauma in the moment, but you transformed the bully. And then you paid it forward to a woman who was able to use that in the moment, which is extraordinary if you think about it. And is it always that simple? And probably at the moment, it didn't feel really simple. You were probably here, there, but I know that when as an adult, I used some of those very same things, and I was protected extraordinarily, but I believed I was protected. So I stood in my truth, no matter what was going on out there. So what if you weren't able to? What if you were just flattened? And I mean that in ways that you can't even talk about because it's so dark to you. And it's happened to women. The whole Me Too movement was about that, about women being assaulted, just to get ahead in their work.
Mm-hmm.
And it robs you of your soul, for lack of a better word. So what do you do? So the very first thing, and then we'll talk maybe next time about actual techniques, but the first step is to recognize the trauma, is to recognize and become aware of the unravel, of the event, whether it happened 10 years ago, yesterday, or 50 years ago. Then to allow yourself through a safe modality, and the alpha brain, whether it's movement, art, EMDR, there are lots of different techniques, and I'll talk about them next time, to let you feel your feelings, not to re-traumatize yourself, but to allow the feelings to have a safe stage for expression. Safe. I don't mean with a gun. I don't mean by attacking someone else, physically or emotionally and mentally. A safe place to express the feelings that never could be expressed from the traumatic event. That might take one session. It might take years. Everybody's different. So and then the third step is to actually go into alchemy, to transform those of the feelings, the beliefs, not to make them wrong, the thought forms, and transmute them into who you truly are. And then to move and embody the truth from that point on. So I remember I was hired by a veterans hospital in Menlo Park to work with women assaulted by Desert Storm, and also, in the armed forces, and also with men. And I only worked one time with a woman who had been assaulted in the military. And in this one session, and none of the talk therapy had worked for her, or medication. And in the one session, she said, I've never experienced anything like this. This is incredible. I feel like me again. And I didn't get to see her again, but for some people, it can be that simple. And then they can use different ways of connecting inwardly, whether it's mantra or meditation or yoga, and then really bring that into their being as well.
Yes. Yeah. And everything you said, what happens is, if you don't deal with trauma, whether it's from childhood or, in your adult life, then you're always hyper vigilant. You're always trying to keep yourself safe. You're always afraid to reveal who you are and step into your truth and share your creative gifts or intuitive gifts and all of those things, because there's this hyper vigilance all the time about,
Exactly.
am I safe? Am I safe? Or will
Exactly.
somebody, violently, physically assault me or verbally assault me, or will I be, placed in this position that is very threatening? So dealing with trauma is absolutely vital, especially as you get older as an adult and you feel like you have gifts that you want to share. Because if you don't share them, there's a quality of depressed energy that you feel that is really palpable, that then creates more frustration, which then creates more depression. And so you kind of are locking yourself into this place, and you're still, in many ways, playing victim to what
Yes.
happened to you in the past. So you really have to find ways to deal with this, with the trauma. Otherwise you'll never make any forward movement, and you'll wonder why you always kind of take one step forward, two steps back, and don't ever make any headway.
Yeah, and I think that part is so important because I've been doing my latest research is on intergenerational trauma, and we've talked about that, and that often we're not even aware of. So we can certainly be aware if we've been sexually assaulted or if we've lost a dear one suddenly, and our whole lives has changed, or if we've had a fire in our house or whatever it is. Yeah, of course, that we can. And we can see how it affected us. But what if you're carrying trauma that you're not even conscious of? And what you're saying is so important because we don't realize how hypervigilant we become. And you know how some people are people pleasers and then other people are control freaks, right? And they often find each other.
Yeah, yes, yes,
And then
yes,
there's an explosion because people who are people pleaser often are passive aggressive because they don't know how to express who they are because they're afraid that then they won't be liked. And
yes,
those who are control freaks, they're so afraid that if they don't control, something horrible will happen to them. So either way, you're 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 reacting in life
mm-hmm.
to things that you're not even aware of. And so that point of awareness is so important because then you have choice. You have choice once you're aware. And that's what you and I've talked about this. That is the whole point of the spiritual path. I'm not talking about a religious path. I'm talking about a spiritual path. It is the whole point of doing any inner work is to become conscious so we can do what we were meant to do, which is live with joy.
Yes, yes, yes,
And what we tend to do, and I'm still I'm still a flower, working on blooming more, and we all are, and we have to remember that none of us ever get it done. However, that path of consciousness is so important because it is the unconsciousness that creates the violence
yes, yes.
all around us.
Yes. In fact, I was reading something just the other day, and I don't know how accurate it is, but somebody was quoting something an author had said, or a researcher, that our lives are dictated, 90% of our lives are dictated by the unconscious. And unless you make the unconscious conscious, then you'll forever be trying to kind of hide or keep yourself safe, or you're
Sublimate, yes.
afraid. Yes, and you're afraid to take risks, you're afraid to step out, you're afraid to reveal who you are, you're afraid to stand behind your authentic wisdom. All of those things just keep perpetuating themselves, if unless you make the unconscious conscious, and unless you do your trauma work.
And again, it's about you know, how do we coexist? How do we live on this planet more peacefully? And it is about everybody doing some of their inner work to make your trauma conscious and to not think that it's out there that's hurting you.
Yes.
And that's the greatest issue with trauma, is that you think, you believe, you've experienced that the out there has hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to shift that understanding. I mean, life happens, and they say that, but you can't skip over the stuff that you've really experienced as damage.
Yes. Yes.
And
You have.
sometimes it does happen over years and years and years. I mean, I think about, I saw another film on TV that was it was a true story that was documented in a movie. And it was a woman who'd been kidnapped, a teenager. And she, I think he kidnapped her, and I mean there's a couple of stories, some where they had children and raped many times and was in a room, and just these horrific things that we hear about. But this one teenager got released in 3 months. She somehow got out, but the trauma was so extraordinary that she could not go back to her normal life, and she ran back to him.
Wow.
And finally was able to, did a lot of therapy, but her parents didn't understand. They just wanted her back. And they
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand the belief systems that had been instilled, because there were other girls that he had kidnapped. So there were a bunch of different girls in different rooms used as prostitutes, and they were all teenagers. So, this happens. We don't think it does, but it does.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we healing them, healing the perpetrators is important.
Yes. Yeah, the other part of all of this as well is that if you have the courage to heal your trauma, then you send out this kind of message, or the energy of safety, to people that maybe haven't dealt with their trauma and are trying to find safe places. Because I know what I've found is that people just open up to me and tell me all kinds of things, even strangers that I might meet, in the food store or wherever. But they will start sharing things, and it's because I'm sure the trauma has been dealt with and worked with, and I'm sure you find the same. I'm sure people tell you the same things, same type of things.
They have, yes. Well, I know next time let's talk about the specific techniques that we can do.
Yes, because I think that would be very helpful. I mean, we've shared a few today, right, in terms of prayer work, embodying that, so that you can not that you want to kind of attract some major event,
No.
but certainly, just doing the energy work, prayer work, repeating a mantra, or, an affirmation, or whatever it is, whatever feels right for you, is a really great way of feeling like you're embodying and you're protecting yourself, right, in terms of where you are putting your energy, and so on and so forth. And then not diminishing. If someone, for example, online says something hateful or, negative, just, don't diminish, stand in your power, send light and love, do what you have to do in terms of blocking and all of those things. But don't contract down, just stay in your power. So those few things I think really
Yes.
help as a
And
good
then
starting.
and I'll share some other for those people who weren't able to stand in their truth,
Yes,
that it's already happened and they haven't really shared it, or they kept it sort of locked
good.
within
So we have a
themselves.
date. We
We
have a
have a
date.
date. You'll have to come back, everyone.
Yes, for another episode. So maybe this is a good place to end this episode for today. And as always, it'd be great if you could just, Françoise, if you could just share with people where they can find you again, so that they can reach out if they want to book a session or something with you.
Yes, and again, I would like to offer everyone as a gift to contact me and offer a complimentary 15-minute consultation. And they can reach me through my website, www.bodyminddynamics.org. And there's 2 Ds, bodyminddynamics.org. And I have an email and a phone number on there, and I'm on WhatsApp. And I also do all my sessions if you can't be in person on Zoom. And I will be offering, and I haven't offered a movement workshop in a very long time, called Creating Calm in the Midst of Chaos. And it will be a movement workshop. You don't have to have any dance experience, or you can even be in a wheelchair. And that will be in Denver. It's on May 4th, but I am going to allow people to come on Zoom for that as well. So you can contact me. It's not on my website yet, but all the information of one-on-one sessions. I'm also going to be at a fair in Loveland, Colorado, for 2 days this next weekend. I believe it's, it's March. March, what is next week? March 9th and 10th. And I'll be doing readings, clairvoyant readings and sessions, and people can contact me and I'll give them the same price as that as well if they can't come in person. So bodyminddynamics.org. And I don't know, should I share my email?
Yes, that would be great. I mean, I'll have this in the show notes, but it would be good.
F like Frank, E like Edward, Netter, Netter @yahoo.com. And please share only good things. No, if you need a place to vent, you can vent somewhere else.
Yeah.
However, I'd love to consult with you if you'd like to contact me.
Thank you, Françoise. That's great. And of course, I will, as I said, I'll have everything in the show notes so people can click and go. I'll also have your offer in the show notes as a reminder for people who and watch later. So that would be really great. So, Françoise, thank you so much. This has been a really wonderful episode on creative wisdom and resiliency, and with some very helpful tactics and tools for people to start utilizing ahead of the next episode. So, thank you. Thank you so much.
Namaste, everyone.
Namaste. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This has been really great, as always. I really appreciate your time and your willingness to join us. And if you feel like this content has value, let other people know. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. That would be really great. So that's all from us for now. Stay well, be well, take it easy, and keep smiling bright. Okay, bye.